Doing test shoots as an aspiring photographer is such an incredibly important part of building your portfolio and also improving your craft. But there's a really fine line with this, and I feel that it can get to a stage with a lot of photographers as they progress throughout their career where doing test shoots just doesn't become as beneficial anymore. Now, I'm not saying to not do test shoots at all as you progress through your career, because I still feel that even as someone who is about 15 years into their photography career now, I still feel that test shoots are an incredibly important part of me continuously improving my craft and also building upon my portfolio work. But, and there's a big exception to this, as I mentioned, it can get to a point where this becomes less beneficial. And I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why certain test shoots are less beneficial and what you can kind of avoid when you're planning your test shoots to make sure that you're going to be benefiting from anything that you photograph, especially when it is unpaid work or when it is considered portfolio work. So if you're new here, hi, my name is Kaylee and I'm a beauty and fashion photographer based near Sydney, Australia. I started this channel around 10 years ago now to talk about all things photography related and to do Photoshop tutorials, photography tutorials, basically anything under that umbrella. And today we're going to be talking about specifically why I don't do unplanned test shoots anymore, and we're going to go in depth as to why I feel unplanned tests are not that great for your career as you are really moving through it and getting better and doing more paid work. And I'm going to be going into depth as to why I feel this way at this point in my career and why I think that a lot of people should be cautious, a lot of photographers should be cautious about when your test shoots kind of start to get to this point. So starting off with a few of these reasons, I really want to preface this video by saying I'm talking about specifically unplanned test shoots. Now, I think for a lot of photographers, especially fashion and portrait photographers, we do tend to test a lot, especially in the beginning. We are trying to do as much photography as possible to build our skills as quickly as possible. We try and work with as many models as possible as well to kind of get as many faces in our books and really just experiment a lot. But there's a point where this can get to where it's almost too spontaneous. I don't think there's anything wrong with a spontaneous shoot, but when you get in the habit of continuously doing unplanned tests or spontaneous test shoots that you're kind of organizing on the spot, or you don't really have too much of a concept or a plan behind them, I think this is where it can sometimes become a problem for a lot of photographers. I was finding well over 10 years into my career that there were times where I was organizing test shoots and I felt that they were so spontaneous a lot of the time, and I had no concept, I had no idea of what I was actually going to do on the day. I was kind of just winging it. And unfortunately, in turn, a lot of the images that I was getting from these test shoots ended up being very subpar or not to my liking, not something that I would want to put in my portfolio. And I felt just kind of deflated at the end of the shoot. I'd feel like, oh, if I'd maybe planned it a little bit better, or if I had bought some clothing or props along that would have suited the shoot a bit more, it could have made it a little bit more interesting. I didn't really communicate with the makeup artist. I didn't communicate with the stylist or the model in terms of what we were going to be doing. It was just a really simple mood board that I just kind of pulled off of Pinterest, and that was that. So I found myself photographing for the sake of photographing a lot of the time, and it really wasn't benefiting my portfolio and myself. I think this is a really common thing that a lot of photographers can fall into as they go through their careers, and it is something to kind of avoid when you start to get to that point where you feel like things are just not planned enough, things are way too spontaneous, there's no concept. When there's no benefit to actually photographing an unplanned shoot, this is really where you have to step back and look at this and say, is it even worth it? Because I also found what was happening was a lot of modeling agencies were contacting me, and this still happens to this day, and they send me through packages of girls and guys all the time. And I feel that I'm sort of at the point in my career where I just feel like it's too much. I have other paid work, other projects that I need to focus on, and I don't have enough time anymore to just focus on necessarily doing test shoots at the drop of the hat, and especially when I'm not getting paid for it. So this leads me into my next point, which is that nobody seems to want to pay for test shoots. It is really difficult to get modeling agencies in particular paying for test shoots. I've found that unless you're really situated in a city environment where you've got modeling agencies nearby and you've worked with them a lot over the years, it's really hard to get them to actually pay for you to do these tests. And I have sent my rates off so many times over the years, and quite often it just never amounts to anything because there's just so many photographers out there who are willing to photograph these portfolios for these new faces at agencies for free, which is understandable because I was also once one of those photographers. So it is really hard to get those paid tests, and unfortunately for me these days. You know, once you have a mortgage, once you have a lot of other commitments in your life that you need to pay for, obviously you're running a business, you can't always afford to be doing these test shoots just off the bat, and especially if there's not going to be any real benefit to you and your portfolio, especially because a lot of these test shoots or a lot of these packages that modeling agencies send through to you will be full of new faces who have had very little experience in the modeling industry. So you quite often come away from those shoots, even if they are planned, as feeling like the photos may not have been so beneficial to your portfolio, because you do spend most of the time on those types of shoots really trying to get the models to relax and to get them doing different things, just to get them really getting into the flow of modeling. So sometimes they just don't feel too beneficial anyway. So along with this, having limited time is a really big issue. And when you start to get to the point where you're prioritizing your paid work over this kind of thing, a lot of the time, it's very difficult to try and fit a lot of those unplanned, spontaneous test shoots in. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, when I say unplanned, I mean really spontaneous shooting and shooting for the sake of shooting. I'm not talking about magazine submissions, editorial submissions. I'm not talking about test shoots that have really carefully been thought out and planned and really crafted from scratch in terms of a concept that you want to create or something that you really want to make work for your portfolio. That is beneficial for you. But unfortunately, when it gets to this point of just feeling like it's taking up all of your time and you're not getting any benefit from it, that's when you need to reassess. Not to mention that test shoots can work out to be very expensive, especially if you're like me and you live near a city like Sydney. Sydney is one of the most expensive places in the world, and especially to hire a photography studio. For a photography studio, on average, you'd be looking between $500 and $1,000 per day in Sydney to hire a studio. So if you are wanting a test shoot to run from 9 till 5 and you want to book that studio for a full day, you could be paying up to $1,000 or more in some instances. So for a start, that is the kind of money that I think most photographers just do not have to waste on test shoots that are extremely spontaneous and unplanned. And that's part of the reason these days where I tend to not spend my efforts too much in test shooting like that, because it just is way too expensive. It was different when I had my own studio and I was paying some rent each month, but that was only ever going to be a temporary thing. So unfortunately that didn't last forever, but I already knew that when I signed up for it. But again, going back to the fact that it is so expensive on test shoots sometimes, because not only are you paying for the studio hire and the lighting hire, if that's the case on the day, you may also be paying for food, or you may also be paying for the travel to get there. So for me, I live pretty much like an hour and a half away from the nearest city, which is Sydney, and that's a fair way for me to travel. That's either petrol or train fees. So again, like, it's just these extra costs that keep adding up. So I can't really afford to just do test shoots on a whim anymore, especially because most of my work these days is studio work, and I do work in studio a lot with beauty photography, so I don't really just wander the streets as I used to when I was a much younger photographer and I could kind of use that natural light and everything in that sense was free. Nowadays, I tend to work in studio a lot more, so that really does limit me in terms of how many tests that I'll be doing each year. And then the final reason I'm going to talk about as to why I don't really do unplanned tests anymore is that I felt that I was actually losing my love for photography. I felt that doing these kinds of test shoots over and over and over and over again with no particular point or no particular concept, no particular creative motive, it just felt kind of empty. And a lot of the work I was producing felt empty. It looked not that impressive, and I would kind of start to hate sitting there and editing through a lot of my photos and just looking at some of them and thinking like, I could have done such a better job on these. I wish I'd planned them out more. So I think that these points that I've talked about today, you really start to notice when these kind of things come up, or these thoughts in your brain, and you start to think about this a lot more and realize that maybe you're not getting as much from your test shoots as you would like. That's usually the sign to kind of take a step back with it a little bit more and start really carefully planning your test shoots a little bit more and curating them in a way that it's going to make you feel proud afterwards when you've finished them and when you start editing the photos. You never want to come home from a test shoot and feel like it was a waste of time, because that is the worst feeling. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this video today, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, make sure you do, because I'll be posting a lot more in future. Let me know down in the comment section below if you have similar feelings towards test shoots at the moment, especially unplanned test shoots like we've been talking about in this video today. Let me know if you still do testing or if you've completely stopped testing altogether. I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Also, let me know down in the comments what you'd like to see on my channel next, because I'm always open to requests. But thank you so much as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.